So there I was on Tuesday afternoon this week. I was in the middle of working away. I was using Claude. Uh, for those of you who don't know, is the AI tool that I have been using extensively throughout my entire business at this point. And it just stopped, completely just stopped responding. Now, the first thing I did, as any completely rational person would, was to assume that I had somehow broken the internet. I mean, classic, right? I sat there for a moment, refreshing, like that was going to help, and wondering what on earth I had done to break Claude. And then, of course, I did what any self-respecting person does next when technology lets them down. I opened up social media on my phone to see if it was just me. And of course, it was not just me. What I found instead was this extraordinary wave of conversation. So many people just asking each other if they were making the switch from ChatGPT to Claude. People were posting step-by-step guides on how to import all of your historic content from Chat to Claude and then how to cancel their ChatGPT subscriptions. And people were talking about their values and their ethics and their data and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm reading all of this thinking, what on earth has happened? So, of course, me being me, I dug into it, and what I found has been one of the most interesting real-time case studies in values-based consumer behavior that I reckon I've ever witnessed. And so we're going to talk about this on today's episode. If I back up for a second, welcome to the Brand Marketing Show. I am Kath Langman, founder here at Productpreneur Marketing. And today we are talking about what happens when a brand draws a hard line and stands firm behind its values publicly and watches what customers do, watches as its customers do the marketing for it. And more importantly, what does that mean for your e-commerce business, your brand? Because the lesson here really isn't about AI wars, it's about the most powerful force in marketing, a customer who buys because they feel seen and understood, not because they just found the best price for something. Alrighty, now before we dive into it, let me give you a little bit more of the full picture here because the details do kind of matter. So a few weeks ago, the US Department of War, yes, that is apparently what they're calling it now. I think the Pentagon has rebranded, approached Anthropic, which is the company that owns and makes Claude, with a contract proposal. And the deal was worth serious money, reportedly around $200 million. And Anthropic said yes, but with conditions, specifically two really hard red lines. Number one, Claude would not be used for mass domestic surveillance. And number two, Claude would not be used in fully autonomous weapons systems. And the Department of War apparently said, we need full access with no restrictions. And so after that, I mean, it must be really hard to turn $200 million contract down. But the Anthropic CEO, Dario Amodei, basically looked at a $200 million government contract and said, no, not a negotiating no, not a let's find a middle ground no. It was a we cannot in good conscience do this no. So, of course, the Trump administration did not take this particularly well. Trump posted about it, called Anthropic a radical left AI company, and ordered all federal agencies to stop using Anthropic's technology within 6 months. The Defense Secretary designated Claude a supply chain risk to national security, which is usually a label that's normally reserved for companies with ties to foreign adversaries. So, a fairly strong response. And then, unsurprisingly, within hours, OpenAI, the company that makes ChatGPT, announced that they had stepped in and signed their own deal with the Pentagon. OpenAI's CEO, Sam Altman, said the deal includes safeguards, but the specifics were, let's just say, somewhat vague. And the internet absolutely erupted. There's been a Reddit post saying cancel and delete ChatGPT, which racked up 30,000 upvotes at the point that I was looking at this. An Instagram account called Quit GPT, if I can get my words out, gained 10,000 followers overnight. People were posting detailed guides, like I said earlier, on how to export your data, delete your account, migrate everything over to Claude. Chalk art appeared outside Anthropic's San Fran office reading, "You give us courage." And Claude apparently went from number 42 on the Apple App Store to number 1 in 4 days, overtaking ChatGPT, which has been the most dominant AI tool on the planet to date. Free users on Claude apparently jumped over 60% since just January. Paid subscribers more than doubled. Daily signups hit record highs. And, so it's a bit of a no-brainer why on Tuesday afternoon my Claude stopped working because the servers were absolutely flooded. I mean, worth it, honestly. And the thing that is kind of cool about this wasn't a new product update. There was no new feature. There was no viral campaign. There was no discount offer. The brand simply just held a line, to their values, and the market responded. Now, a real quick note for listeners, I should be extra transparent here. The situation has developed a lot further since all of this kicked off, and there are more moving parts than a simple hero and villain story. My point isn't that any one of these companies is perfect. It's about what the consumer response tells us about people making purchasing decisions when values are on the line. So let's just talk about what this actually means for you, because I promise this is not a story about AI companies and American politics. This is a story about your customers and my customers and every premium, innovative, independent brand that is out there trying to compete in a market where the cheapest option is always just one scroll away. And the first lesson, I think, is that your customers are already making values-based decisions. It's just whether or not you're giving them enough to work with in regards to your brand. Here's the thing that strikes me most about the ChatGPT walkout. It happened with such extraordinary speed. Within 48 hours of the news breaking, people weren't just complaining, they were actively cancelling their subscriptions, deleting data, migrating platforms, and recruiting their friends to do the same. And that doesn't happen unless people already knew what the alternative stood for. I think this is probably why I've been drawn to Anthropic or Claude in the first place. They've spent years being, transparent about their approach to AI safety. Their values weren't buried in a footer somewhere or locked in a corporate social responsibility report that nobody's going to read. They have talked publicly about their red lines all along. They've built a reputation. And so when the moment came, their existing users and hundreds of thousands of new ones already had the context to make a decision. And so, have a think about that for your own brand for a moment. If one of your customers was standing maybe at a market or sitting with a friend, could they explain in 30 seconds why your brand is worth paying potentially a little bit more for, or buying at full price, God forbid, versus in a deep discounting sale offer? Not just what your product does, but why does your brand exist? What do you stand for? What do you refuse to compromise on? And if the answer is probably not, then that could be a real problem when it comes to your website's ability to convert sales. Because your values don't just live in your head, they have to live on your website pages, in your copy, in your photography, in every word that you use to describe what you make and why you make it. I think the second lesson is that values are a conversion mechanism. They're not a corporate formality. So I do want to push back on something that I do hear fairly often in the marketing world, not just digital marketing and e-commerce, but just, of course, that's the world that I spend most of my time in. But, it's the idea that your values are a nice to have thing, and that you put your sustainability commitment on, or your sourcing story on your about page, and that's sort of done. And, then you can just go off and make commercial decisions without really revisiting that story. But that isn't how values-driven consumers shop. And I will be specific here because research consistently shows that a significant portion of consumers, particularly, in the premium, independent, and sustainability-focused brand space, which is exactly where we operate and where probably most of you listeners operate, will actively choose a brand based on alignment with their own values, and they will pay more to do it. But here's the catch, they can only choose you if they can find the evidence. And if you think about what a values-aligned e-commerce website actually looks like, it's not just listing some certifications in a row of pretty little icons at the bottom of the page. It's telling the story behind why those certifications matter to you. It's not just saying something like sustainably sourced. It's saying things like who sourced it, where, and what that relationship looks like. It's not just a cruelty-free badge. It would be explaining the choice you made when perhaps a cheaper option wasn't cruelty-free and you chose integrity over margin. That's the kind of stuff that converts a curious browser into someone who pulls their credit card out of their wallet and feels really proud about it. But so essentially, the best websites, and I'm talking in particular about the key pages on your websites that traffic land on and that are designed to convert, like your product pages, they don't just describe what something is. Your websites have to give the customer the language to justify a purchase they already want to make. The third lesson, I think, is that the things you choose not to do can be just as powerful as what you do. Anthropic's most powerful statement wasn't, look at all the amazing things Claude can do. It was, here is what we will not do, regardless of the financial cost. And, have a think about that in the context of your own brand. I mean, the brands that built fiercely loyal communities during COVID weren't the ones shouting about how great their product was. They were the ones who were really transparent about what they wouldn't compromise on, like local manufacturing when it could have been cheaper to outsource, or supply chain ethics when it would have been so much easier to look away, or no markdowns when every competitor was slashing prices. The no is often more powerful than the yes. For example, no synthetic fragrance, no mass market retail, no factory farming, no greenwashing, no animal testing, no minimum order requirements for small businesses. Whatever your version of the red line is it visible on your website? Is it expressed in a way that your ideal customer will recognize themselves in as well? And then the fourth lesson is that the word of mouth at scale can start in a really small way. It can start with your website, maybe a product page that really gives people something to say. The whole cancel ChatGPT movement went viral because people had a really clear, specific thing to say. They had a reason, they had a story, they had something to post about that made them feel like part of something bigger than just a purchasing decision. Of course, you do not need to have a government, controversy to trigger that, and I really promise you don't need that, and you don't, certainly wouldn't be choosing to manufacture that just for the sake of it. What you do need is a product page on your website that gives your values-aligned customer enough to work with. I'm talking about your product pages specifically because they are typically the pages that most website visitors are going to land on for the first time, whether it's from ads or emails or your social media content or, whatever methods you're using to drive traffic to your website. By and large, the product pages are the first page that people are landing on these days. And so, what we need is on this page to give your values aligned customer enough to work with, enough that when their friend asks, well, why did you buy that brand? And they're going to have an answer that sounds like conviction and not just, oh, well, the bottle looked pretty or whatever the case may be, And that is the difference between, or it can be the difference between a one-time buyer and someone who genuinely advocates for you and, really making sure that we get that messaging right when we are interacting with our potential customers on those most important pages of our website. It makes an enormous difference. So let's get a wee bit concrete, because I know some of you might be sitting there thinking, well, that's all well and good. I believe you, but what does this actually look like on my website and on my product pages? And so let's kind of do a little bit of a walk through the anatomy of a product page that does this well, one that doesn't just describe a product, but communicates a brand. And so you want to start with the above the fold section, and that is literally what is showing on the screen before someone has to start scrolling, which on your mobile phone is going to be a pretty small amount of space. Lots of e-commerce brands waste their most valuable real estate on either a lot of white space up the top or just really obvious stuff like the product name, the price, a couple of generic images, and a button, maybe a call to action button. The brands that convert at a higher rate, they're using the space above the fold to communicate identity. And so not just what the product is, but who made it and why that matters. And even a single line of subheading copy can do some extraordinary work here if it's really well considered. For example, handcrafted in small batches in the Adelaide Hills tells me something, versus premium face oil doesn't really tell me anything that I couldn't have guessed. The story beat, the human behind the product, is another component that really needs to be on the page. Somewhere on that page, before someone reaches the add to cart button, they really need to understand why this product exists. And that, you can't just be paying lip service to some kind of corporate mission statement. It needs to be an actual reason. Why did you make this? What problem were you solving that nobody else had solved well enough? What would you not compromise on even when it costs you more? And it doesn't have to be long. 2 or 3 sentences executed really well can be the thing that closes a sale that 1,000 words or feature copy never could. And then how about the proof layer and making values tangible? Because values without evidence are just marketing claims, whereas values with evidence are trustworthy. Certifications, ingredient transparency, sourcing information, manufacturing details, third-party endorsements, independent awards, anything that turns your stated values into something that a customer can verify for themselves. And I don't mean just a wall of badges. You do want to have a curated, well-explained section of the things that actually matter to your ideal customer. And you want to have somewhere on the page what we might call the mirror moment. And that's copy and content that makes the right person think, well, that's me. And I think that this is a component that most brands miss or just don't do very well. Having great product copy doesn't just describe the product, it actually describes the customer, the one who, will love it, the one it was made for. When a customer reads your page and thinks, well, this brand gets me, that's not an accident. That's really intentional language that reflects their values, their lifestyle, their priorities right back at them. And yes, this will also gently repel the customers it wasn't made for. That is not a loss, that is targeting, and it's really valuable. And then what about your social proof stack? When you curate the reviews you highlight on a product page, look for the ones that really speak to values, not necessarily just outcomes. I mean, my skin feels amazing is really nice, but I finally found a brand that doesn't compromise on ingredients and actually delivers results is much more impactful. Those reviews will tell the next customer exactly what kind of brand you are and the kind of experience that they'll enjoy when they buy from you before they have even read a single line of your own written copy. Now, if you've been nodding along to any of the points that I've made in this episode and thinking, well, I know my brand has values worth communicating, I just genuinely don't know how to translate that onto my website and onto my product pages in a way that converts. So if that's you, I've made something for you and I have a very special introductory offer to share with you. It's called the High Converting Product Page. It's a short course. It'll take you about 90 minutes to go through. It's the framework that I use with all of the brands that I run and that I work with. And to build product pages that don't just look good, but actually do the job. We go through the exact structure, step by step of, a product page that communicates things like brand values, but also is designed in a way to drive conversion. So there's, the copy frameworks, the visual hierarchy, the story beats, the proof layers, the language patterns that make your ideal customer feel seen and make them click buy, including, essentially some prompts that you will be able to use to train your, hopefully, Claude account to help you execute this really efficiently. And right now, I am offering it. This is brand new, hot off the press, just a couple of days ago, at 75% off. And that is not a rounding error. It is genuinely that accessible because I really, really, really want the brands that should be growing to actually be able to access it, afford it. So the link I will put in the show notes for this episode. You can go to productpreneurmarketing.com/episode hyphen 305 to find this episode show notes page. And if your product pages don't reflect the brand that is in your head, then this is where you fix it. Also, just real quick, that 75% off price is just $47. Like literally, you would spend more on traffic that doesn't convert than that. So you'll get your money's worth very, very quick. Before I let you go, I do want to leave you with this though. The ChatGPT walkout was not at its core a political event. It was not a tech event. It was a purchasing event. Millions of people made a decision about where to spend their money based on whether a company's actions matched their stated values. And that's not unique to AI. It's not unique to a particular political moment. That is how a growing segment of consumers make purchasing decisions across every product category: beauty, food, homewares, cars, clothing, wellness, their baby stuff, their pet stuff, all of it. The brand or the brands that understand this, are not just building a customer base, they're building a movement, and movements don't evaporate when things like Meta changes its algorithm or when a competitor drops their price by 20%. And your product page is often the first place that a potential customer looks to understand what your brand actually stands for. So you really want to make it count. Thank you for listening to this episode today. If you found it useful, I would love it if you share it with another brand owner who really needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe on whichever platform you choose to listen on so that you never miss an episode. That is it for today, and I look forward to being back in your ears again next week on the Brand Marketing Show.